People who've had an affair with a married person. What's the dirtiest, most shameful secret you're finally ready to confess? Have been involved in an affair with a married man, 63 male, for more than 4 years. I have no excuse. The affair started when I was 18. I needed money for college and was desperately looking for quick ways to earn some. During my search, I came across Craigslist. There I found an ad from a man looking for someone willing to exchange favors for financial assistance. He said he was a businessman who traveled often and wanted a companion. He also mentioned that he preferred someone who was less experienced. I responded, thinking that if I had to give up my V-card, I might as well do it for money and be able to continue my studies. It's a disgusting thought, and I still feel ashamed when I think about it. When we met, I didn't care that he was old enough to be my father, and neither did he. He told me his wife knew about the arrangement and had given her permission, explaining that she was no longer interested in intimacy because it had become painful after menopause. He promised to pay for my tuition and give me a monthly allowance as long as I didn't fail my classes. I agreed. After about a month, he told me he loved me. He said he loved that I didn't drink, party, or get involved with other men my age. He loved that I was loyal to him. At the time, I brushed it off. I only cared about the money. I was in my 3rd year of college, just 2 more years away from earning my degree. I thought I only needed to stay for a few months, save the allowance he gave me, and then I'd be set for the next 2 school years. But then he started doing more. He brought me food. He drove me to school. He asked how I was. He gave me time and attention beyond our weekly meetings in random motels. And before I realized it, I was saying I love you too. We started calling each other love. Early in the affair, he told me that after I graduated and took the licensure board exam, he would leave his family. He said we'd have children and live together. I was his, and his alone. I believed him. I started longing for graduation, for the day he'd finally be with me for real. No more secret trips out of town or quick drives to motels. He'd come home to me. Then we had a fight, and he told me that what we had was temporary. He said he could not and would not leave his wife. If I couldn't accept that, then we should end it because it was okay for him to lose me. It felt like my world collapsed. I should have left. I was foolish and selfish for believing he would ever choose me. I was greedy. I wanted to hear beautiful promises, and I wanted them to be true. I forgot that I was only the mistress, someone who didn't deserve to expect anything more. I was completely fooled into thinking I had somehow been promoted to the place of his wife. But instead of leaving, I made excuses to stay. I told myself it was a practical choice that I needed to finish college first. I convinced myself that I could separate emotion from reality. What we had was just a transaction. I gave him what he needed in exchange for fees. I stopped calling him love. I stopped returning his I love yous. I met him only for the physical thing, not for affection or intimacy. He felt the shift. I became cold and distant. I let him use my body, but I had taken my heart back, and it seemed he didn't like that. He wanted both my body and my love, so he began to woo me again, doing all the things that once made me believe he truly cared. He cooked for me when I was sick. He celebrated my birthday. He would pick me up even when it was raining and the traffic was terrible. He even drove to my internship every day to bring me lunch despite the 2-hour distance he had to travel. He told me he couldn't lose me, that he loved me too much to let me go. He apologized, said he missed me, missed us. And I was foolish, naive, and selfish. By the semester before my graduation, we were back to how we used to be. And before I knew it, I had been involved with him for 4 years, almost 5 this coming December. I love him more than ever. I'm already in too deep. I've drowned myself in my own selfishness and insecurity. I'm in law school now because of his urging. He told me I'd make a great CPA lawyer, but I'm struggling. I don't even want to become a lawyer. The truth is, I only enrolled because I wanted an excuse to stay close to him. I'm now in my 2nd semester of my 1st year. Law school is hard. It's exhausting and painful, and it has forced me to finally ask myself what I really want to do with my life. Even though he still gives me his time and attention, I know I'm only a temporary part of his world. That realization hurts more than anything. It's been 2 years since I graduated from college, yet I have no work experience while my batchmates already have thriving careers. I'm stuck here chasing a degree I don't want, all because I wanted to stretch out my time with him. I feel lost. I know that if I end things, he'll move on, despite all his hundreds of love confessions. Maybe he'll find another girl to fill the same role I once did. But where would that leave me? Just thinking about leaving him breaks my heart. I love him. I don't care about his money. I just want to be with him. I know this is my fault. I was greedy, and maybe I deserved the pain that comes with it. But I'm terrified of living without him, no matter how small the pieces of his time I get. I know I have to end it. I just don't know how to survive when he's gone. Story 2. Once, I had an affair with a coworker who was a married man. I'm a pretty transparent person, but I've never told anyone about this. Not friends, not family, no one. In my very early 20s, I worked at a large company with my dad, Bob, not his real name, and Bob's wife. Bob was about 15 years older than me. My dad and Bob worked in the same department, not close friends, but friendly enough, and they often collaborated on projects. I technically worked in the same department, but in a different area on another floor, doing the usual entry-level work. Bob's wife worked in a completely different department. Bob had to come down to my area a few times for work-related things, and we'd chat casually while he was there. But soon, he started coming around more often. No real reason, just checking in. Our small talk turned personal. Eventually, the random emails he'd send me at work, usually funny things or music-related, turned into messages from his personal account. Then we started talking outside of work altogether. We had a lot in common, and the conversations just flowed. Before long, we started meeting up in person. At first, we'd just go to the lake, hang out, smoke, and talk. But inevitably, things turned physical. One night, my dad hosted a party at his house and invited several people from work, Bob included. Bob showed up and at one point quietly mentioned that he'd really only come to see me. Everyone was drinking, laughing, and mingling, and no one was really paying close attention. At some point, Bob and I slipped upstairs together and ended up in bed. We were up there for quite a while. When he finally got up to leave, we realized almost everyone had already gone home and panic set in. Bob quickly came up with a plan. He told my dad he'd gotten too drunk and had passed out on the couch in the media room for a while before heading home. After he left, I ended up passing out in the bedroom myself. The next morning, I was dreading facing my dad, terrified that he might have caught on, but he didn't seem suspicious at all. He laughed and said, "Did you know Bob passed out on the couch last night?" I just smiled and said, "No, I didn't. I passed out early in the evening." Bob was having problems with his wife at the time. Early 20s me had the attitude of, "You only live once. Just leave her and live your best life." But he had kids, and he told me it wasn't that simple. Back then, I didn't really feel guilty. I didn't fully understand the weight of what I was involved in. After a few months of our affair, his wife found some of the emails we'd sent each other. She never found out that things had become physical, but she knew we were talking, and she was not happy about it. One day, she apparently had enough. She came storming into the office asking, "Where is he?" By pure luck, I wasn't at my desk and a few coworkers stepped in to de-escalate the situation. That moment was a wake-up call. I remember sitting there afterward thinking, what the hell am I doing? I sent Bob an email that day, telling him I couldn't keep being part of this and that we needed to stop. And we did. Not long after that, I left the company and I never saw him again. With time, the guilt set in. His wife was a genuinely kind woman, and I can't imagine how devastating it would have been for her to know the full truth. I still think about him sometimes. He really was a good guy, and we got along so well. In another universe, maybe things could have worked out between us, but not in this one. It's been years now, and around this time of year, I always think back to when I first started at that company. I figured it was finally time to share my deep, dark secret. Story 3. I, 28, male, have been in an affair with a married man, 55 male, for 10 years. I'm a man, and the person I'm involved with is also a man. He's been married for 12 years. His wife is an alcoholic and, honestly, a difficult person, but he'll never leave her. He says he feels sorry for her and that there's still some kind of love there. He loves me. I know he does, but he has a problem. He constantly cheats on both of us. I always catch him lying. He lied about his wife in the beginning, and that's how I ended up with him. I was young, naive, and in love, so leaving him was never easy. Then I found out he had a daughter. He's always talking to people on Craigslist. He's told me that he stopped himself from meeting them multiple times, that he only chats out of boredom. Over the years, we've had so many deep, emotional conversations where he breaks down and swears he'll change, and every time I end up staying. 2 days ago, I found out he's been regularly meeting up with another man. He told me he can't help it. To make a long story short, should I tell his wife about the affair? He's hurting both of us, and possibly others with his behavior. I don't think she deserves to be deceived like this, and I know she already suspects that something's been going on outside of their marriage. Story 4. I long-term affair with my married former professor, and now I feel like a fool. Please feel free to judge me if you must, but I really need advice and support right now. I'm using a throwaway account because I feel so ashamed. My question is this: do you think my former professor used me and never actually had feelings for me? To give some context, I grew up in an abusive and dysfunctional home. There were times when I went to bed hungry because neither of my parents wanted to work. I studied hard and eventually got into one of the top universities in the country. I thought my life would change overnight once I left for college, but as a teenager, I didn't understand how deeply trauma affects the brain. When I finally got there, I didn't know how to manage the depression and lack of motivation that suddenly hit me. Throughout my 20s, the men I chose to have serious long-term relationships with turned out to be, at best, controlling and at worst abusive. Even in friendships, I sometimes found myself drawn to people who treated me poorly. I do have some truly good friends, and over time I've cut ties with both friends and family members whom I now recognize as toxic. I still blame myself sometimes, but deep down I know I was just desperate for love and affection from people who reminded me of home, people who made me feel about myself the way I already did inside. My sense of what was normal was never really within the healthy range to begin with. Now I have a good career, but this past year has been incredibly difficult. So much has happened, and of course the pandemic hasn't helped. With all this time alone, I've started to reevaluate my life choices. I know I need to break these patterns, learn to be content with myself, and find ways to cope with my treatment-resistant depression, even in such an isolating time. Going back to my undergraduate years, when I was around 22 or 23, there was a visiting professor teaching during the summer. He was married and decades older than me. I felt an instant attraction to him, though I tried my best to hide it since I'm naturally shy and found him incredibly intimidating. Most people tell me I'm one of the hardest people to read. He would flirt with me often, and eventually I started flirting back. One thing led to another, and after the semester ended, we became intimate. He returned home afterward, and I assumed I'd never see him again. But the following year, he came back to my area, and we resumed both verbal and physical contact. Even after he left again, we stayed in touch for nearly a decade through email. For me, our connection became something like a pen-pal relationship. Oddly enough, I could open up to him more than to most people. It's always been easier for me to write than to speak, especially since I tend to be passive and reserved. Honestly, I never thought we'd be physically intimate again. When I returned to my home country, we eventually saw each other again, after years of exchanging mostly platonic emails. At the time, I was trying to escape an abusive relationship. I still remember how his hands trembled when we kissed for the first time in years. Long story short, his wife and my boyfriend both found out about us. I managed to get out of my abusive relationship, but I assumed the professor would immediately cut off all contact with me. To my surprise, he didn't. He stayed with his wife, but continued seeing me until we both agreed that the guilt had become too heavy to bear. We finally ended all contact, and that was years ago. A part of me wanted to end contact because of the guilt and shame I felt for hurting his wife. I kept trying to convince myself that as long as she never found out, she wouldn't be hurt, and since he'd done this with other women before, I told myself it wasn't entirely my fault. Deep down, I knew that was just an excuse. I also realized I couldn't date anyone properly while my heart, or maybe my infatuation, still belonged to him. I think what I loved was the idea of him, not the real person. Some part of me knew that if I got to know the real him, the fantasy might crumble, and that terrified me. It felt safer to push him away, either to avoid being disappointed or to avoid falling even deeper. As flawed as he was, he made me feel seen. There was always this unspoken understanding between us, a shared sadness that made me feel connected to him. Or maybe that's just what I wanted to believe, or what he wanted me to believe. I honestly don't know anymore. Throughout the decade we stayed in touch, I always reached out to the professor whenever I needed support. After everything that's happened this year, and after many years of silence, I emailed him out of the blue to tell him about my life. He never responded. I understand why, but it still hurts. I miss the excitement, the attraction, the distraction, the rush of lust and infatuation that for at least a few moments helped lift me out of my depression. I miss our friendship, the comfort of opening up to someone who seemed to be listening, who seemed to care. But I also know we can't just be friends, not after everything that happened. And I know how foolish that makes me sound. I'm painfully aware of how obvious my mistakes are, yet the longing still lingers. I can't help but feel like he hates me, though I know that's probably dramatic. Still, I can't shake the thought that his silence isn't just about protecting his marriage. Maybe he feels too old now, maybe he thinks he can't satisfy me anymore, and that makes me useless to him. For so long, I wanted him to see me, to really see my soul or whatever part of me I thought was special. But looking back, I can't help wondering if he just groomed me. Maybe he saw how vulnerable and naive I was, a lonely 20-something desperate for attention, and decided to take advantage of that. Maybe I was just a nice young distraction to him. I feel like such a fool for reaching out again. I'd rather he tell me to screw off or even brag about how wonderful his marriage is than just ignore me completely. The silence feels so final, so cold. It makes me think I never meant anything to him, that I was just another notch on his belt, something to stroke his ego or feed his need for control. And I hate that part of me still misses him, even after realizing all of this. I know I'm not being entirely rational right now. I know I'm emotional and slipping into my fantasy world again, but I just want to know that I meant something to him beyond the physical. I've had other encounters that were purely physical, and I was fine with that. But with him, I wanted it to be deeper. I find myself both pitying and envying his wife. I just wanted him to admire me the way he admires her. I know how foolish that sounds. I just don't want to feel like I was used, especially now that I'm older, wiser, and can finally see how young 22 or 23 really is. But then I wonder, do affairs or relationships where one person is simply using the other really last a decade? He always gave me just enough to keep me hanging on. And if I'm being honest, I think we both played games. I'd pretend to be aloof even though I cared deeply. I'd call him out on his lies or insincere compliments, but I was still desperate for his attention. I'd go out of my way to act like I didn't care when in reality I cared far too much. Story 5. I, male 20, had an affair with a married woman, a 38-year-old mother. I ruined her life, and I feel absolutely awful about it. About a year ago, I met Amy, not her real name, while I was interning at a large law firm. She worked as a paralegal and seemed like one of the firm's key people. Everyone liked and respected her. On my first day, she was assigned to show me around, introduce me to the staff, and help me get settled. From the start, she was warm and approachable, and we got along effortlessly. At first, we were just good friends, nothing inappropriate. But as time went on, our conversations started to get more personal. Amy began to open up about her marriage. She told me she was unhappy and felt unfulfilled, that her husband, also a lawyer but at another firm, prioritized his career over everything else, including their family. She said there were nights he got so wrapped up in work that he didn't even come home, claiming to sleep at his office. I didn't want to pry, but part of me doubted that story. I couldn't help wondering if he was the one being unfaithful. I wanted to comfort her, but honestly, I didn't really know what to say. The weekend before my internship was set to end, Amy called me. We had never really talked outside of work. Our relationship was strictly professional, so I was surprised she called. Full disclosure, I kind of had a crush on her. She was very attractive and smart. We spoke for about an hour about random things, and then she asked if I wanted to come over. She told me her husband had taken their 2 children to his parents' house out of state and that they would be gone for the rest of the weekend. I went to her house, and to make a long story short, we ended up sleeping together. I'll skip the explicit details, but I really enjoyed it. She told me right away that she didn't want it to be a one-time thing. Again, she said her husband was terrible and that I shouldn't feel bad about what happened. I was making her feel happy in a way he didn't. I told her clearly that if she was unhappy, she should consider divorcing him. She gave me some understandable reasons why she couldn't. This affair went on for about a year until Amy's husband found out. He informed the law firm where she worked that she had been involved with an intern. They launched an investigation and ultimately fired her. He also filed for divorce, and from what she told me, it seems she might lose custody of her 2 children. I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have done what I did, but my emotions and hormones got the better of me. I feel terrible about it. I just don't know if there's anything I can do now to make things right. Story 6. I had an affair with my married boss, who was 28 years my senior. I was in my early 20s when I worked at a small Hispanic restaurant. It was almost 3 years before I ended up having an affair with my boss. He was a Hispanic immigrant, married to an American woman who was a doctor. Together they owned the restaurant. It was common knowledge among the staff that before me, he'd had an affair with another woman who also worked there. She was married too, and probably 10 years older than me. That affair ended when she started seeing a 19-year-old who also worked at the restaurant. After that, my boss went back to focusing on his marriage. At least, that's what everyone thought. One of my coworkers had become really close friends with him, and that friendship kind of bridged the gap between my boss and me. My boss was laid back, funny, and charming, the kind of person everyone liked being around. One night, that coworker invited me out for drinks and mentioned he'd also invited our boss, who had just returned from a 10-day trip to his home country. When he arrived, we hugged, something we'd never done before. Honestly, I was just happy to see him after he'd been gone. The 3 of us kept drinking and eventually went back to my coworker's house to keep the night going. At the time, I was still in a relationship with my high school sweetheart. We'd been together for 6 years, but somehow my boss and I ended up alone in my coworker's room, and we ended up sleeping together. It was great, but also incredibly awkward. I went home to my boyfriend, and he went home to his wife, who also happened to be my other boss. The next day, I texted him in Spanish, telling him that I liked what had happened and that I wanted it to happen again, and it did. My request was definitely fulfilled. We began an ongoing affair. Not long after, I broke up with my boyfriend and got my own place. My bosses actually helped me out. They paid my security deposit, which really meant she paid it since everything they had was in her name. She even gave me a bunch of furniture. Then things took a turn. My boss was diagnosed with cancer and had to go through multiple treatments and surgeries. One of his surgeries was in New York, and his wife paid for my coworker friend and me to visit him there. I knew accepting those things from her was awful of me, but I did it anyway. By that point, everyone at work basically knew we were having an affair, everyone except his wife, and she was honestly one of the kindest women I'd ever met. It felt thrilling to be with an older man, even though I knew it was completely wrong. I told myself it was worth it because I developed real feelings for him, and I truly believe he felt the same way. Then one day, his wife called me at work and asked if I could walk down to the cafe nearby to talk about some work-related things. I was kind of in a managerial position at the time, so I didn't think much of it and agreed. Still, I felt uneasy. I didn't understand why we couldn't just talk at the restaurant. As soon as we sat down, she looked me in the eye and asked, "What's going on with you and his name?" My heart dropped. I told her, "Nothing. I respect him, and I respect you. He's like a friend, pretty much." My hands were shaking the whole time. When we got back to the restaurant, she pulled her husband, my boss, outside to talk. About 20 minutes later, she came back in, put her arm around me, and said she'd seen his phone and knew everything. Then she rubbed my back and told me, "It's okay." I was in shock. I left shortly after. The affair continued for another month or two, but it finally ended when I met the man who would become the father of my children. A few months later, I was fired because of my drinking. I'd been calling out of work a lot. Even after that, I'd still stop by to visit, until the father of my kids eventually asked me not to go there anymore because of everything that had happened, even though I'd met him there. I still feel awful for what I did to that woman. She was genuinely kind, and she didn't deserve any of it, but I truly cared for him, and part of me still does. It's been 10 years since it all happened. Sadly, he passed away in 2024 from the cancer he'd been fighting. When I found out, I was heartbroken. Story 7. For about 6 months, I was involved in an affair with my best friend, who was married. It started the way these things often do, one drunken night that went too far. She made the first move, and almost immediately afterward, I felt regret. I knew we had crossed a boundary we couldn't uncross, and yet we kept doing it. It wasn't something we planned or talked about continuing, it just happened. We'd been close friends for nearly 5 years before that night. There had always been light, harmless flirting, and I knew she was curious about women, but I never thought we'd actually cross that line. As friends, we already got along effortlessly, but to my surprise, we connected just as deeply on a romantic level. It felt like we clicked in every way, and it wasn't just the thrill of doing something forbidden. She eventually admitted that she'd been secretly attracted to me for a while, and after being intimate with her, I started seeing her differently too. The transition between friendship and something more was sudden, but falling in love with her happened slowly, almost quietly over time. After the first couple of months of sneaking around, constant texting, late-night calls, spending hours together, we both admitted that our feelings had crossed into something deeper. We were in love. We briefly questioned whether that meant we should stop, but in the end, it felt impossible to stay away from each other. The chemistry between us was incredible, not just physically, but emotionally too. We'd spend hours upon hours talking, laughing, and sharing everything. 6 to 8 hours of one-on-one time would pass in what felt like one. By the end of it all, I was completely in love with her and wanted her to leave her husband for me. Her husband was her first relationship, first love, first everything. They'd been together for about 8 years and married for 3. She told me she felt they were fundamentally incompatible, that their bond had been built more on her desire to escape her controlling, religious household than on true connection. During those 6 months, she often told me she regretted marrying him and wished she'd waited, that she was so much happier when she was with me. After about 5 months, her husband found out. He didn't have solid proof, just circumstantial evidence and suspicions. But when he confronted her, she admitted to a fraction of what had happened. She didn't come clean about everything. She told him it had only happened a handful of times, and even lied about certain details, like the intimate things we'd done. Even after he found out, she continued sneaking around with me for another 3 to 4 weeks, pretending she'd cut off all contact. Eventually, he discovered that she'd still been talking to me, though not that we were still sleeping together. That's when he finally threatened divorce, and she shut down completely. For months, even before he knew, I had been urging her to be honest with him, not just about me, but about her feelings toward their marriage. She did admit to him that she was conflicted about who she wanted to be with, and that what we had was serious. Despite that, he decided he wanted to try to make it work, as long as she cut off all contact with me. She told me she felt like she had to at least try, and then she officially ended things between us. Now I'm left alone, having essentially doubled my losses. I lost my best friend and the person I loved. I feel deeply sad and bitter about how everything has turned out. She used me to fill the gaps in her marriage, but when it really mattered, she wouldn't leave it. The bitterness runs so deep that I've thought about telling her husband the full truth, exposing everything that actually happened. She let him believe it was only a few times, when in reality, it was more like 3 to 5 times a week for 6 months. The only thing holding me back is that I still love her. She was my friend for so many years before all of this, and that history makes it hard to let go of my empathy for her. Still, I can't shake the feeling that I was completely taken advantage of, used, then discarded. I don't know what to do now. Story 8. I, female, 33, had an affair with a married man for over a year. I met Dean, male 35, not his real name, at our local gym. We started off with easy, casual conversations, just friendly small talk between workouts. After a few of these chats, one day he walked me to my car, and with a burst of confidence I didn't even know I had, I kissed him. He didn't hesitate. He leaned in and kissed me back. We exchanged numbers, and he asked me out for coffee later that week and dinner the next. I asked him more than once in different ways if he was single, and every time he said yes. A little backstory on me. I was married, but it was a marriage of convenience, something my now ex-husband and I both agreed on. We still lived under the same roof, but in separate rooms on opposite ends of the house. We shared a daughter, and our arrangement just made life easier. Anyway, after a couple of dates with Dean, things started to heat up between us. The chemistry was undeniable, and the intimacy was incredible. At some point, I explained my situation, that I was technically married but in name only, and he told me his was the same. When I mentioned that he'd told me he was single, he brushed it off and said, "Yeah, same situation as you." The chemistry between us was off the charts. We had such an amazing time together that even when I started to get gut feelings that something wasn't quite right, I pushed them aside. I didn't want to see what might really be going on. He was the first to say I love you. He showered me with expensive dinners, constant messages, and daily phone calls. I won't lie, I loved the attention. It felt good to be wanted, to feel special again. Then, one day, something in my gut told me to look him up on Facebook. I found his profile, and right there was a photo of him and his partner, smiling, looking happy with a ring shining on her finger. By that point, we'd been seeing each other for about 3 months. And yes, I know it sounds naive. The red flags were there, but he was just that convincing. In that same stretch of time, I'd told my ex-husband I was ready to make our separation official. We split our assets, he bought me out of the property we shared, and I purchased a home of my own. I was moving forward, ready for a new chapter, and then I saw that picture. I called Dean immediately and confronted him. He said all the right things, of course. Told me I was overreacting, that it was an old photo, that she sometimes wore the ring to keep up appearances. He insisted they were done, that he loved me, that I was the one. I spent as much time with him as I possibly could. Dinners, a week-long trip to the coast, overnights at my place whenever he could manage it. But whenever he was with me, he'd tell his partner he was either working late or at the gym. Eventually, I started to wise up. The doubts crept in, and they grew stronger by the day. Whenever I questioned him, though, he'd twist it around, saying I must not love him if I doubted him, that I was overthinking, that I was trying to ruin something real. He became increasingly secretive with his phone, quick messages angled away from me, screen turned over, private calls he'd step outside to take. When I asked about it, he said he had to keep the peace with his ex and talk to his child. Then he moved away for work, FIFO, which made seeing each other much harder. We'd video call almost every night and meet up when he was back in town. But by then I was starting to come to my senses. The distance was helping. I decided to pull back a little, to see how he'd react. The response was immediate and intense. He completely lost it, calling and messaging me about 20 times in a single night after I'd set my phone to auto-reply with, "I'll call you later." He kept messaging, and I started leaving his texts unread, not replying right away. Whenever I didn't answer, he'd keep calling or texting until I finally gave in and responded. By this time, it had been going on for 12 months. The doubts were constant. Dean still texted, still said he wanted to catch up, but I began keeping my replies short and detached. Then I found out the truth. Through a mutual friend at the gym, I learned that he had bought a house in the state where he worked, and that he and his wife had been trying for a baby the entire time. I was gutted. And then hearing from that same friend about how lovely his wife was, kind, caring, just an all-around beautiful person, made me feel even worse. When I confronted Dean about the house and the baby, he said, "I didn't want you to find out like that. I was going to tell you." Sure. He kept trying to message me after that, but I either didn't reply or sent short one-word answers. Eventually, he got the hint and stopped contacting me altogether. From our first chat to the last text, the whole relationship lasted 16 months. I was completely gutted. I'd given everything to him, my time, my trust, my heart. I really believed it was the real deal. I genuinely loved him. A close friend, who had been trying to knock some sense into me for months, finally convinced me to try dating apps. That's how I met my current boyfriend, an amazing man who treats me with genuine care and respect. We're still together now, and we're celebrating 1 year this month. Every now and then, though, I still think about Dean's wife. I've been tempted to message her. Part of me feels she deserves to know the truth, to know what kind of man she's with. But another part of me wonders if I'd just be destroying her life for the sake of easing my own guilt. I'm torn. She has no idea. She doesn't deserve the pain, but she also doesn't deserve the lie. Maybe this belongs in the raw advice section too. Story 9. I'm having an affair with a married man. I used to have a friend I could talk to about it, but I've since stopped. She got very religious and judgmental about the situation, so I lied and told her we'd ended things. Back in early 2018, after he'd been separated from his wife for a while, and right around the same time I was going through a painful breakup myself, he reached out to me on social media. At first, he was just offering comfort and support. It was kind, genuine, and honestly what I needed at the time. We grew close. After about 5 months of talking every day, the I love you messages started. It felt like bliss, like maybe we'd both finally found something real after so much hurt. I truly believed it was love. Then, about a month later, he ghosted me, just disappeared. Shortly after, he and his wife made a very public announcement on social media, condemning any relationships they'd had during their separation and declaring that they were ready to move forward in their marriage. I was heartbroken, but I understood. Deep down, I think I always suspected it would end that way. Still, it hurt to see them together after everything we'd shared. I couldn't bear it, so I unfollowed him and tried to move on. Earlier this year, 5 years later, I randomly thought about him again and decided to check his account. On impulse, I followed him, not expecting him to even notice. But he did. Almost immediately, he sent me a message. He told me he'd been thinking about me over the years and had been wanting to reach out but couldn't find me. It was the first time we'd spoken since everything ended, and honestly, it felt amazing. We slipped right back into conversation as if no time had passed at all. He said reconnecting with me, talking every day again, made him the happiest he'd been in years. I felt it too. There was something so familiar and comforting about it. At one point, I told him how hurt I'd been when things ended all those years ago. He said he understood and then shared that he was separated from his wife again. I told him I was sorry to hear that and wished him the best, saying I genuinely hoped they could work things out. I set a boundary, kept things friendly, and at first it seemed like we were both okay with that. But just like before, things slowly started to turn romantic again. We realized we still had so much in common, more if anything, and our conversations stretched for hours. He was the one who started saying all the heartfelt things, but I couldn't help feeling it too. I still find him incredibly attractive, and resisting the pull toward him became harder and harder. Recently, we met up, and we slept together. It was, without exaggeration, the most passionate, beautiful, almost tantric experience I've ever had. It felt electric and emotional, like every part of us was in sync. Afterward, he told me he loved me and didn't know what to do. I told him I loved him too, but that I felt awful. The guilt came crashing in, right alongside the longing. I don't know how to stop this. I want him desperately, but I can't ignore how wrong it feels. I love the time we share, the way we talk, the way he makes me feel alive. I don't want it to end. But at the same time, he still lives with his wife. I'm terrified they'll reconcile, especially now that she's started tagging him in her posts again. People always tell me, there are millions of people out there, just find someone who isn't married. And I have. In those 5 years apart, I dated someone seriously and went on countless dates in between. We're both attractive, successful people. We could each probably have whoever we wanted. But that's the thing. There's something magnetic between us that I can't seem to replicate with anyone else. It's like the more we talk, the more we see each other, the deeper we fall. I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't be in this situation again, but it's hard to describe how powerful the connection feels, how natural it is, how alive I feel with him. I guess I just needed to vent. Story 10. I'm in an emotional affair with a married woman. I'm single, and she's married with a young child. We've known each other for a few years through work, but until recently, our relationship was nothing more than casual acquaintances, sharing a few laughs to make the day go by faster. Over the past few months, though, we've grown much closer, exchanging secrets, texting late into the night, and opening up in ways I never expected. I usually find it hard to let people in, yet she's managed to get me to share some of my darkest secrets, and she's accepted them without hesitation. We've gone out a few times, but nothing physical has happened, not even a kiss or a friendly hug. Still, it's clear that she's falling in love with me, and I'm falling for her too. You can't fake that sparkle in someone's eyes. We only see each other after work, usually when her husband is out of town or when she's expected to be out with friends for the night. She's never said anything directly, but it's obvious that no one else knows about what's happening between us. The thing is, I know I've been weak and foolish, but I do love her, and I'm fairly certain she loves me too. Still, I know what it's like for a family to fall apart because of infidelity, and I don't want to be the cause of that pain for anyone else. I'm willing to carry the weight of my own heartbreak if it means she can be happy, but I doubt I can do that and still keep her in my life as my best friend, especially since we work so closely together. She's the highlight of my day, and losing that connection feels unbearable. Is there any option here besides losing my best friend forever? I love her enough to hide my pain just to see her smile, but I can't help hoping there's a more peaceful, more human solution that I just haven't seen yet. Story 11. 3 years ago, I met an 26 female at a bar. It was his birthday, and he was out celebrating with a few friends. Our eyes met, and I was instantly attracted to him. I waited about 30 minutes for him to come over and talk to me, but he never did, so I decided to crash their party myself. My friends and I ended up joining their group, hopping from place to place, and Jeff and I spent the night talking and kissing. Before the night ended, I gave him my number, but I didn't hear from him for about 2 or 3 months. Eventually, he texted me to say he was sorry and that he couldn't stop thinking about me, but that life had gotten in the way. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just a line. A few days later, he called, and I decided to pick up. We made plans for dinner, and during that evening, I learned he was divorced and had 2 kids, whom he had most of the custody for. He told me he was a lawyer, and we realized we shared several hobbies, plus he was just incredibly attractive. We ended up sleeping together that night at my place while his kids were home with a sitter. We officially became a couple about 3 months after that. Most of the time, he came to my place since he had the kids, and I never thought much of it. I grew up in a divorced household, and my parents were both very careful about who they brought around my sisters and me. I didn't even meet my dad's now wife until they'd been together for more than a year, so Jeff's caution made sense to me. When the pandemic hit, I didn't hear from him as much. He told me he was overwhelmed with work and helping his kids with remote learning. And again, I didn't question it. Then in June, he surprised me by booking a week-long getaway to thank me for being so patient and understanding about his responsibilities as a dad. I was thrilled. It felt like a chance for us to finally relax and reconnect. We barely left our rental that week. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I felt equal parts anxious and excited, but Jeff wasn't happy. He said he didn't want any more children, and that he already had enough to handle with his own. That turned into a huge fight, and I ended up kicking him out of my place. He called me a bunch of times, but I was still trying to process everything. Eventually we talked, and he tried to convince me to get an abortion. I refused, and he reluctantly dropped it. Fast forward to about 2 weeks ago, I found out this asshole isn't actually divorced. He's still completely married. His friends covered for him, and even his own brother helped him keep up the lie. I felt physically sick when I learned the truth. And the best part, when I confronted him, he told me that nothing had to change, that he'd pay for the baby and we could still keep sleeping together. What the actual hell? In case anyone's wondering, I haven't spoken to him since. Story 12. I'll start by saying that I know I'm in the wrong here. I'm fully aware that I'm the bad person in this situation, which arguably makes it worse because I know my choices are selfish. I'm not trying to excuse what I've done or am still doing, but I hope this helps explain it. Just before lockdown, I moved across the country to start my first proper job after university, in a city I had never been to and where I didn't know anyone. About 6 months in, during lockdown, one of my older colleagues began messaging me. It started as friendly conversation but quickly became flirty. I reciprocated because I was so lonely and miserable. The way he treated me made me feel special and less alone. It gave me something to hold on to, something to think about. Talking to him was the only thing that seemed to get me out of bed in the morning. My mental health was in shambles, as was the case for so many people at the time. Aside from him being a senior colleague and the age difference between us, he's also married with children. I know this is wrong and I hate that I've continued to be involved, but the thought of ending it feels impossible. Now we're almost 2.5 years into our affair, and he's being very distant and cold. I'm pretty sure he's pulling away. I feel like I'm sinking. I can't talk about this with anyone because of the circumstances. I'm so lost. Please, can I have some advice on how to get through this? Story 13. I am ashamed of myself. I didn't think I was the kind of person who could do something like that. I need to talk about it. And since I can't with my friends, I'm ready to receive hate in the comments if that's what comes. I just need to let it out. We were at a party together. The friend hosting had offered for us to sleep at his place, since it wouldn't have been safe to drive. The party was great. As the night went on, some people went home, some went to bed, and we stayed up talking with another friend until early morning. When that friend decided to go home, we agreed it was time to get some sleep too. I went to sleep with a girlfriend while he took the couch. After about an hour, she had to leave, and seeing him on the couch, told him he could take her spot. I won't lie, he's my type. But he's married, and until that night I'd never let myself think of him that way. Still, our conversations earlier had made me realize he might have a thing for me. I was half asleep when he came into the room, but realizing it was him woke me up immediately. He asked if I was sleeping, and I tried to joke that I was, until he came in and asked if he could please let me go back to sleep. For a few minutes, nothing happened, and I tried to fall back asleep. Then I suddenly felt his hand on my upper back. That's when I knew I should have said stop, but I didn't. He asked again if I was sleeping, and I said no. Then he asked if we could cuddle, saying he just wanted a hug. That's when things got out of hand. I knew it wasn't a good idea, but I agreed anyway. We cuddled for a bit, and then he started to kiss me. I tried to tell him to stop, that it was a really bad idea and that he'd regret it later. Honestly, I was trying to convince myself as much as him, but we were both really foolish, and what happened, happened. When we got out of bed later that day, I offered him a ride home. We talked in the car. He said he didn't regret what happened and that I shouldn't feel bad either, because he's a grown man and the only one who could be blamed in this situation. But I know I'm just as responsible. I knew his situation, and I should have said no. I'm not expecting anything from this or from him. I'm not even asking for advice. I just needed to get this off my chest. Story 14. I met up with a married man last night for $5,000. I'm an exotic dancer and recently moved to a bigger city. Last night was unusually good. A man from out of state approached me. He looked to be in his late 30s, with a shaved head and a scruffy beard. He immediately took me to the private hour-long VIP room where we took shots. He told me he would give me $500 to make out with him for 30 seconds. I agreed, and he gave me the money right away. We exchanged numbers afterward, and he asked if I could leave work to come back to his hotel room. I'd never done anything like that before, but I had a good feeling about him, so I left and picked him up. Back at his hotel, his friend, also married, was there. We all ended up doing it for about 4 hours. Afterward, he paid me, and I stayed for a while in the morning. The hotel was nice. We went to the pool and gambled. He gave me more money to use on the machines, and I got to keep whatever I won. Story 15. I did it with my married sister-in-law last weekend. Before I begin, I should mention that I'm widowed. My wife passed away from cancer about 2 years ago, and we have a daughter together. Over that time, my wife's younger sister and I have become close. We've always gotten along well, and she's been a strong female presence for my daughter, who adores her. The three of us have spent a lot of time together over the past couple of years. Last weekend, while my daughter was staying overnight with a friend, I texted my sister-in-law on a whim to see if she wanted to go to a movie. Afterward, we went back to my place, and one thing led to another. It was the first time I'd been with anyone since my wife died, and it felt unexpectedly emotional and overwhelming. I care deeply for her and can genuinely see a future together. She's wonderful with my daughter, and I can't imagine anyone else fitting into our lives the same way. But she's married, and that reality can't be ignored. She told me later that she wants to work on her marriage, and that what happened between us can't happen again. I understand her decision, but I'm heartbroken. I have no one I can really talk to about this, and it's been eating away at me. I know what we did was wrong, but part of me can't stop wishing it could somehow work out. Story 16. A few weeks ago, I went out with some friends for drinks. One of my really good friends, Nick, offered to be the designated driver for me that night since we live relatively close and he didn't want to drink much. His wife was supposed to come too, but one of their kids ended up getting sick, so she stayed home. Nick and I have known each other for almost 20 years and are very close. He's been my designated driver multiple times before, so this was never an issue with his wife, Mia, whom I also get along with very well. Anyway, the night of the get-together, everyone was drinking and having fun. I'll admit I got carried away and drank more than I should have. Eventually, we left. Nick walked me to my door and asked to use the bathroom, and I said yes. The next parts are a bit fuzzy, but I think I dozed off on the couch because I remember him shaking me, telling me I needed to go to bed. He sat beside me and started kissing me. I don't think I told him to stop. I remember us going to my bed. As he was getting ready to leave, he kept repeating that we could never tell anyone about this. I agreed and must have passed out. The next morning, I saw a text from Mia checking in on me. Apparently, he told her he stayed a bit longer because he was worried about how much I'd had to drink. I felt so guilty. I cried myself sick. I've distanced myself from them because I just can't handle the guilt. Fast forward to this week, Nick and Mia hosted their yearly Halloween party. Since I live nearby, I usually help with decorating and setup. I wanted to try to show up, but the guilt kept eating at me. This past Thursday, I told Mia I was coming down with something and probably wouldn't be able to make it. On Friday, she had Nick drop off soup for me after work. He was angry. He told me I needed to get my act together, that it was a mistake, and we both needed to move on. He said if I didn't stop, I'd end up ruining his marriage and his kids' lives. I barely recognized him in that moment. He demanded that I show up on Saturday and act like everything was normal. He genuinely expected me to spend several hours with his wife, pretending I hadn't slept with her husband. I honestly don't know what to do now. I have no intention of telling her. I just can't bring myself to do it. The guilt is eating me alive, and I've been having panic attacks thinking about it. I just need advice on how to move forward. Is there a way to end the friendship without admitting what happened? Story 17. I'm obsessed with being intimate with married women. My physical type is incredibly broad. I've been fortunate enough to be with women who could easily pass for models and others who wouldn't turn many heads in a nightclub. Tall, short, thin, curvy, athletic, redheads, blondes, brunettes, women of every background and race. The one thing they all shared, without exception, was personality. Loving, funny, classy, thoughtful, and happy. Even though I've been with many women, I was never a cheater. Every relationship happened at a different time. That was fine throughout my 20s, but as I got older, I started meeting fewer women with those qualities. Maybe it's because of the career path I chose, or just the kind of people I began to meet. I'm not sure. What I do know is that when I started seeing those same traits again, they always seemed to belong to married women. The first affair I ever had was with a woman I'd known for years. I felt terrible about it at first, but she constantly told me how unhappy she was and how she deserved more. She said she stayed for the kids and things like that. It ended when she confessed to her husband, and they both promised to stop cheating. I moved on, but since then, I've found myself drawn only to married women. I know it's wrong in every possible way, but they have the personalities I love and the passion I crave. I tell myself that life is short, and if they're unhappy at home, maybe I'm giving them an escape. It's not noble, but it's honest. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.